Hi guys, Angela here from One Stop for Writers with a special webinar that Becca Puglisi and I put together to show you how to see your stories, characters, and even readers the same way we do. Because when you think like a story expert, you can zero in better on the description that really matters in your story. This helps you know what details to include and what not to, and how to show, not tell, so your readers become more engaged, feel more connected to your characters, and your writing itself grows stronger. Now, before I dive more into how Becca and I think and what helps us brainstorm powerful description, let's talk about readers. Now, readers pick up a book for different reasons. Maybe they need an escape from the real world, or they want to be entertained or experience something new, or they just want to see how someone else handles life's ups and downs. No matter why they're reading, though, the only way that we're going to hold their attention is if we make them care about the people, places, and events that we're writing about. So our job really, it comes down to making the readers feel something. Now, I'm sure it's no surprise that our characters, especially the protagonist, are the key to triggering a reader's emotions. Your central character is going to be at the heart of everything. And every element, your plot, your stakes, your conflict, your settings, and even the world that this story takes place in, these should all be personalized to your protagonist or feature character. Now let's say we pick up a book and the plot is a mystery and the protagonist, Emma, she is being framed for murder. Well, until we get to know her and the situation better, the book is going to get a big so what from us, right? It needs to become more personal. Emma, she's not just being framed for murder, it's her husband's murder. And he had debilitating MS, and as his caregiver, she administered a lethal dose of pain medication. But was it murder? She knows she followed the instructions to the letter and believes the pharmacist gave her the wrong dose or maybe medication. But how does she prove it? And to make things worse, Emma has a young daughter. So if she goes to jail, what's going to happen to her little girl? Now, this situation is more personalized to Emma, and it's a little bit more interesting plot-wise. But other than a little bit of sympathy for Emma, I'm guessing you probably aren't too invested yet. And it's because a major ingredient is missing here. And to find out what it is, we need to turn to psychology. Now, I'm not going to try to hide it. Becca and I are total psychology nerds, and for good reason. Psychology is a writer's superpower. It helps us understand how people think and why they do the things that they do. And this can help us get into our characters' heads so we can write their actions, choices, and behavior authentically. But guess what? Psychology also helps us get into the head of the reader too, and that's how we figure out how to make them care about our characters and what happens to them. Now, when Becca and I first wrote the Emotion Thesaurus, we really needed to understand what emotion was and why people experience different feelings, because only then could we show writers how to write those emotions in a way that came across as realistic and authentic. We became fascinated by Maslow's hierarchy of human needs and the psychological drivers that cause people to do the things that they do. Now, some of you know Maslow's teachings, but as a recap, he believed that all people, you, me, the reader, everyone, we have basic needs and they must be filled in order for us to feel complete. Physiological needs are things like food, water, shelter, basically survival needs. Safety and security is about being safe in this world. That's a huge need that we all have. Love and belonging is a social need. It's the ability to love others, be loved, and feel connected. Esteem and recognition is a need to have worth and know that other people see and respect our worth too. And then finally, there's self-actualization, which is about pursuing higher goals, education, being individuals, and living our truth. Now, if one of these needs is missing, we will feel a lack, like something is keeping us from being happy and fulfilled. For example, let's pretend that you worked for a horrible boss who always ridiculed you, brought up every mistake, made you feel small. Your esteem and recognition is going to take a hit. You might even start feeling less than, be unsure of yourself, even grow anxious or depressed. At a certain point in time, though, your distress is going to grow to the point where you have to do something. And so you quit your job because you finally absolutely had enough. Now, we all have these needs because they're part of the human experience, and we can use this hierarchy to understand what our readers need too. Remember earlier how I said readers may read to be entertained, escape, experience new places, events, things like that? Well, I purposely left out one of the biggest underlying reasons. People read to feel connected, to feel seen. Sometimes readers need validation, to know that they're not alone in how they think and feel. If you think about it, life can be isolating sometimes. We don't always know what to do, how to fix our problems. We doubt ourselves as we work towards our goals, and sometimes we can feel really alone in our struggles. So, when a reader opens a book and meets a character who has hopes and dreams just like they do, who struggles and makes mistakes and feels insecure at times, it's like holding up a mirror. They see themselves in the character, and as that character works towards their goals, encounters problems, and has ups and downs, readers are right there with them. Common human experiences and basic human needs build bridges to your readers and your characters. And the more we mirror the real world in our fictional one, the stronger that connection is going to get. Now, if we go back to our character Emma, who's being charged with the murder of her husband, and think about common human needs and experiences that readers might recognize, we can add that missing ingredient that will lead to a strong reader-character connection. For example, maybe she sacrificed something for her family. Perhaps when her husband's condition went downhill, she dropped out of law school, putting his care over her own aspirations. Or maybe she doesn't get along with her mother-in-law, and she puts up with the judgment and the snide comments because she wants her daughter to have a relationship with her grandmother. Or maybe she had an argument with her husband, and the last thing that she said to him was harsh or unkind. Well, now, after his death, she would do anything to take back those words. Regret is another common human experience that unfortunately we all know and readers will know too. So don't be afraid to dig into psychology and use some of these common human experiences, touch on needs, and draw readers in with emotions. Make them empathize, get them invested in your story and what happens next. This leads us to the second question that we need to ask ourselves. How can I make readers feel like this character is a real person? Now, this one is especially key at the start of the story when readers don't know a lot about the characters yet. So how do we make a character feel like they walked right out of the real world? Well, we take the time to give them the same human layers that a real person would have. This starts by creating a character with substance, one that has an identity, past, needs, fears, insecurities, hopes and dreams, you name it. Now I'm just going to take us over to One Stop for Writers because Becca and I have created a tool that can help with this, called the Character Builder. Now this tool helps you brainstorm all the pieces needed to form a character who feels realistic and credible. It uses all of our character-specific thesauruses to help you design all the aspects of a character that you need to make them feel full-bodied and complete. Now this is a character that I created this morning. I haven't even given him a real name yet. He's just called Billy Lunchbucket for now. But as you can see, the Character Builder will help me create his backstory, his personality, his behaviors, his motivations, physical details, and lets me look at his daily life so I get an idea of, who his family is and what is his work like and what talents and skills does he have, what does he do on his time off, all of that good stuff. Now these details all together are going to help me get into his head and see what life looks like from his side of the fence. And those things are going to help me write him in a more credible way. Now, if I wanted to dive into his backstory a little bit and show you how each detail can really tell us a lot about our character, and it's worthwhile to kind of go deeper and find those deeper layers of our character, I might start with his backstory and look specifically at his emotional wound. Now, a character's emotional wound is something that has happened to them before the story started. It's a traumatic event that drastically changed them in some way. It was something that hurt them. And now who they are after that event is very different than who they were before. They may have trust issues, they may struggle with something in life, have certain fears, and these things are going to trip them up in the story. And until they can work through this emotional wound and deal with it in a healthier way, it's going to continue to prevent them from achieving their goal, whatever that is. So brainstorming our character's emotional wound is actually a really important piece of character arc. Now for Billy, I'm not sure what his emotional wound is yet, but I can look at what we have here in the emotional wound thesaurus to sort of start triggering ideas. Now, like any other person, Billy probably has lots of emotional wounds. I mean, after all, life is kind of hard, and they're going to have gone through a lot before they reach the doorstep of our story. So what we can do is we can think about different things that maybe trigger ideas for us. And we can play with those ideas and kind of consider whether or not these are the emotional wounds that we could see for our character or not. So those are the ones I'm going to select for this character. And then what I want to do next is go through each emotional wound and just sort of see, what do I know about my character? What is my gut instinct telling about them? And do any of these wounds really stand out as the primary wound that I could see being a big problem in this story? Because that's what we really want to get to, is which one of these wounds is going to be the primary wound, is going to be the most important one that our character needs to work through in the story. Now, when I think about Billy, I feel like he's going to have a lot of relationship problems in the story. He has a hard time trusting people. He has a really hard time letting people get close to him. So when I look at all of these, my brain keeps coming back to this one, growing up in foster care. So I want to explore this wound a little bit, starting with thinking about, how did this come about? So maybe in my case, Billy's surviving parent passed away and there were no relatives that could take him in. And that's what landed him up in foster care. Or maybe he was actually abandoned by one of his parents, which is going to cause a ton of abandonment issues on top of everything else. Or maybe Billy's only parent was incarcerated or hospitalized or something like that. Once I can think of a reason why he ended up in foster care, that kind of gives me that start point to understand who this character is. The next thing I want to think about is, what's the result of this wound? Like, what are the different things that are now happening in the aftermath? So what is Billy's behavior like? What is his life like? How does he look at other people? Does he have trust issues and stuff like that? So I can kind of go through some of these options and see what feels right for this particular character. I think in his case, he's very private, because the reality is that he had no privacy growing up. And so right now, as an adult, he's very protective of it. I think he also has difficulty sharing certain things because he had so little growing up that he became very protective of it. And it's really hard for him to give things away or let other people use items that belong to him. I think he craves routine. That is something that he really needs, because he was moving around a lot. He was being shuffled from different foster homes and things like that. I think that this character has a hard time asking for help, because growing up, he was always told, don't worry, it'll be your turn, you're going to be adopted. Or he would ask for help and he wouldn't get it. And so he doesn't like asking for it as an adult, because he feels like people are always going to let him down. So maybe these are some of the things about my character that give me a little bit more of an idea of what his behavior is going to be like and how he is now after this happened. Another thing you want to think about when it comes to your character's emotional wounds is, what positive traits and what negative traits did this emotional wound cause? Because it can actually shape your character's personality. For example, Billy became very adaptable. He had to. Growing up in foster care, he was constantly told, you're going to go to this school for the end of the year, and then halfway through the year, he was told he had to move. So he had to say goodbye to his friends, say goodbye to his teacher, start at a new school. And so he had to learn to become very adaptable, just as a survival technique. He's also quite observant. Maybe because he never knew what was going to set someone off in the foster care system. He never knew when another kid was going to attack him or something like that. And so he had to be very observant and pay attention to the different types of cues that were around him, just to make sure that he was safe. He obviously was very resourceful because he had very little. And maybe he's also quite protective because he didn't make a lot of friends, but the ones that he did make are ones that he would protect at all costs. Now, some negative traits that might have come about as a result of this emotional wound for him might be that he's quite abrasive. He uses that friction, that attitude to keep people away, to keep them from getting close, because when they get close, they might hurt him. He might let them in, and then they're going to disappoint him or hurt him in some way. So he's abrasive with people because it sort of sends a message, stay away. Maybe as well, he's quite evasive because he didn't have a lot of privacy, and so now he's fiercely protective of it. And so he's evasive with his answers. He doesn't like telling people the truth all the time because, again, it just makes him feel vulnerable when they know the truth about him or they know personal details about him. Maybe he's also a little bit manipulative, something that he learned to do in order to get what he needed. So these are some of the possible negative traits that he might have growing up in the foster care system. Now, another thing that you can potentially decide to do when you're choosing your character's emotional wound is ask yourself whether or not your character would choose a job that tied into that particular wound. For example, can't you imagine someone who grew up in the foster care system becoming an animal rescue worker? It's kind of the perfect profession because this is somebody who knows what it's like to be at risk, who knows what it's like to want somebody to save them and to never be saved. And so that is kind of the perfect personality to want to become an animal rescue worker, to work with those animals that have been abandoned, or to take them out of homes where they're being mistreated, and to actually be the hero that the character always wished came along in their life. So you don't necessarily have to go and connect this particular dot to this emotional wound, but you can kind of see how this one detail leads to so many other details about our character that we now know. And when we do that, we end up with a character who feels really realistic. And it just helps them feel like they have a lot of layers, like they're a real person. Now, whether you use a tool like this or not, try to think deeply about your character and explore how they're not always going to make good decisions. They're not always going to make good choices. They are going to screw up and make mistakes because readers don't like perfect characters. They identify with other people that make mistakes the same way they do. It makes that character feel more human and realistic. So don't be afraid to give your character some flaws and to show your character screw up and make those mistakes. Okay, this is going to lead us to our third question that we want to ask, which is, how do I help readers experience this moment? Now, we want to make sure that we're writing story moments in a way that it creates a sense of shared experiences, like the reader is right there in the scene. And your characters are going to be facing problems and obstacles and dilemmas. They're going to have to navigate relationships and emotionally triggering situations that maybe they're not going to be comfortable with or suited to handle. Readers need to feel part of those moments, like they're living those moments too. So for them to share this journey, we want to make sure that they're also sharing your character's viewpoint. So this means their observations, their emotions, thoughts, sensory feedback. These are all things that we want to describe. We also want to make sure that they feel involved. And how we do that is look for opportunities to use description to deepen the story and show a bigger picture unfolding. And this is where something that Becca and I call the show don't tell mindset comes into play. Now, the show don't tell mindset is something that Becca and I use to identify opportunities to use description that's going to further the plot, deepen characters, and deliver meaningful information, including subtext that's going to lead readers to certain realizations about the characters and events. This makes it possible for them to become active participants in our story. And as they put these story pieces together to see that fuller picture, it's really satisfying, kind of like being the one to complete a jigsaw puzzle. Now, this is really show don't tell, but kind of on steroids, doing more and strengthening your story on different levels. So let's talk about this starting with a show don't tell primer. Now I know some of you guys are really well versed in show don't tell, but it's the difference between telling the reader Beverly's closet was a mess and actually showing it. Showing the bomb of clothing, the mash of color, the items that spill out when the door is opened. Telling is really just the facts, ma'am type stuff. And when we use it, it has to be when the reader only needs to know something for quick context, or they need a summary of some kind, like maybe how a character got to school in the morning, or how it was a rough day at work, when those things don't really matter to the story. Showing, though, is revealing the essence of a detail. So it forms a mental image and readers feel involved. So in this case, maybe we'd want to write something like, Beverly pawed through a mountain of laundry, trying to unknot her favorite jeans from a pair of tie-dye leggings. A fringed scarf above her tickled her back, and she batted it away, but her fingers caught on something, pulling it from the hanger. This started a chain reaction. Clothes thudded against her. Her back became a suspension bridge, the only thing keeping her clean clothes from the river of dirty fabric below. Now, obviously, showing is going to require more effort than telling. And we also want to avoid that 5 million word novel. So we only want to do show don't tell when it's needed. And we want to do it with purpose and precision. Now, the description I just gave kind of helps us imagine what's happening in this moment. But it also reveals who Beverly is. She's disorganized, she's messy, and either she's too unmotivated or too busy to keep up with her laundry. And this is what good show don't tell should do. It adds to the story in a way that's needed. It tells us something more about Beverly. Now here's the thing. These details are only important to show if they have a point. And this is where having a show don't tell mindset comes in. We can think about this scene and how it can contribute to the whole, furthering the plot, helping readers get a sense of what Beverly's thinking or feeling, and we can reveal new layers of who she is. Maybe we can even show how she's growing, changing, or backsliding, whatever the case may be. So the question becomes, how much description is needed? The reality is, if she's just looking for something to wear, we don't need to spend much time here at all. But what if she's closet diving because she's the maid of honor at her best friend's wedding and she was entrusted with the ring? A wedding ring that she's now praying is in the pocket of those favorite jeans because she can't find it anywhere. In that case, we should spend time here tying her emotions, anxiety and panic, let's say, to her actions. Or perhaps this is a setup scene where her chronic disorganization is going to be the personal challenge that she has to overcome to save her family's failing business when her father ends up in the hospital. Or maybe the state of her closet is actually a symptom of a childhood wound, where she grew up with nothing and so now she can't throw anything away. These are all cases where our show don't tell mindset is going to help us turn a simple closet diving scene into something much more significant and make it part of a deeper story. Now, each detail in our story used with purpose becomes a hook that's going to draw readers in because it's a puzzle piece, helping them connect the dots in a way that we need them to. And these pieces of information might show them what the character truly feels, secrets that they hide, what they want and need, or how a setting, event, or internal struggle is affecting them in the moment. Now, it can take a bit of time to find that best description, but that's what revision is for. So don't beat yourself up if you don't get it right out the gate. I mean, that hardly ever happens. It's going to take time, and you will need to massage the description to bring out this deeper meaning as you go along. But this is also why we created our thesauruses for writers to use, because they help us look for that opportunity to do more. Now I'm going to take us back to One Stop for Writers again, to the thesaurus database, and go through a couple of examples using these entries to show exactly how we can do more with our description. Now, as you can see here, we have a lot of different topics that help you build characters, write vivid scenes, and plan the many different layers of your story. Some of these are guides that we have, like the setting ones, occupations, negative traits, emotions, emotional wounds. But others of these are only here at One Stop for Writers. Beck and I have been doing this a long time, and we've written a lot of different thesauruses, and not all of them have made it into book form. One that I'd like to really take a peek at is the character motivation thesaurus, because this one here looks at over 100 common goals that you'll find in fiction and film. And it'll help you brainstorm what a goal can look like for your character and how it'll play out in the story. Now, if you look at a few here, you'll see that most of these are healthy goals. Carrying on a legacy, catching the bad guy, discovering one's true self, doing the right thing, having a child. These are all positive, healthy goals that a protagonist might have. But we know that you're writing antagonists, villains, antiheroes too, and guess what? They all need goals. Goals like getting revenge, or maybe taking what is owed, or overthrowing good with evil. You know, those darker characters, they also have goals, and we need to know how to write them with authority as well. There's also some here that are specifically for younger protagonists and younger audiences, because typically those goals are going to look a little bit different. They're going to be themes that are more suited to that age group. So this might be dealing with bullies, it may be solving a problem, or fitting in. These are all things that kids can relate to. So no matter what age you're writing for, you need to think about a goal that is comparable, that's going to fit that age group or that audience. And you need to create those goals for those darker characters too. Now let's dip into protecting a loved one, just to kind of give you an idea about your character's goal and the different layers that you want to think about when it comes to that goal, because all of those pieces of information are things that you can use for your story. So the first thing that you would want to think about if you were considering this as a goal, protecting a loved one, is what does that look like for your character? Now we've created a few options here, but these are certainly, these is just a launching off point. The great thing about storytelling is we can all write a story about this goal and it's going to look completely different for all of us. That's the beauty of storytelling. So in this case, protecting a loved one, maybe it's keeping them from hurting themselves. Maybe they are their own worst enemy. Maybe they have an addiction or something like that. Maybe our character is protecting them from being victimized, or there's a threat or a danger, or maybe the character's fighting for their rights because they can't stand up for themselves. Again, it's totally up to you what this looks like, but you should really understand and get down to the specifics of what this looks like in your case. The next thing that you're going to want to brainstorm about your character's goal is understanding the human need that is driving them to achieve it, because this is your inner motivation. Now, I'm talking about Maslow's hierarchy of human needs again. Again, psychology is so fantastic, and using Maslow's hierarchy can really help us get to that very important question: what is my character's inner motivation? Why do they want this goal so badly? Now, in this case, we've listed two different possibles. There's many others, but here's two that we've come up with. The first is esteem and recognition. Perhaps you have a situation where your character tried protecting a loved one in the past and failed. And so now they're really trying to regain their esteem, regain their self-worth, prove to other people that they're worthy, maybe that they're a worthy husband or a worthy son or something like that, that they can keep this person protected. It may also be safety and security, because the reality is your character is not only going to be concerned about their own safety, but all of the people they love. So if someone that they love is in danger, they're going to want to protect them at all costs. So those are two possible human needs that may be driving this character to achieve their goal. The next thing you're going to want to think about when it comes to your character's goal is how are they going to prepare for it? Because the reality is at the start of the story, your character is not going to be able to do this. For whatever reason, they don't have the tools, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the ability, they're in the wrong place. There is something preventing them from achieving this goal. And they need to do different things in order to become someone stronger and to become someone who has the tools that they need in order to achieve this particular goal. So in this case, maybe a character needs to seek out counsel from someone, have a few conversations, find out what they should do. Maybe the character has to educate the loved one in how they can safeguard themselves. Maybe our character is someone who has a sister who just got out of a really rocky relationship, and the guy that she was with is violent and dangerous, and he's doing all kinds of creepy stuff. They broke up. He's still coming to her house, breaking in, stalking her and things like that. And so our character is telling his sister, like, you need to change those locks on your door. Like, you know, he may have multiple keys to get into your house, and you need to talk to your friends and tell them to stop giving him information about where you are. Like, you need to protect yourself. It may be that your character has to stage an intervention of some kind. Again, if your character is a risk to themselves, if they're hurting themselves, that might be something that your character needs to do to prepare to achieve their goal. The next thing you want to think about when it comes to your character's goals is what sacrifices or costs are associated with this particular goal. Any good, worthy goal is going to cause your character to give something up to attain it. This proves to the reader and themselves, the character themselves, that they really want this goal, that they're willing to fight for it. So your character will have to sacrifice something. Maybe they have another goal and they aren't going to be able to do that particular goal because they want to do this one instead. Perhaps in this case, our character is burning through his life savings trying to save his sister, and so that's causing financial hardship. Or he's getting trouble work because he's spending too much time trying to protect his sister. So think about what fits your story and what fits that particular goal. You also want to think about what's going to stand in your character's way, those roadblocks. This is all about conflict. And while we look at some roadblocks that are tied to every single goal in this database, I would be remiss to not point out that we also have a database just on different types of conflict scenarios. So no matter if you need a ticking clock, or you need a danger or a threat or a relationship friction or some sort of dilemma or temptation, you'll be able to find something here in this database. And no matter what it is, you'll be able to see what the minor complications are, what the disastrous results might be. Because of course, we want to make things difficult for our characters. And often that means throwing them from the frying pan into the fire. And they're not always going to be able to solve their problems. And sometimes that conflict is going to lead to even bigger problems. Now, if we go back to protecting a loved one really quickly, there's one other thing that's very important for you to think about when you're thinking about your story goal, is what's at stake. Every single goal, there needs to be something at stake for your character. They have to have skin in the game. Because if nothing bad happens, if there's no negative consequences to failing to achieve this goal, then why would they sacrifice anything? Why would they pay the price in order to achieve this particular goal? So we need something at stake because stakes and their inner motivation, these two things work together to push them on towards this goal, no matter how hard things get. So we want to make sure that we're covering the bases when it comes to story stakes. Now, you'll also notice that we actually mentioned talents and skills here. And that's because while we're thinking about all these problems we're going to throw at our character and everything they have to sacrifice, most of the time we want our characters to actually succeed at that goal. So thinking about a talent or a skill or ability they have, that can be really helpful because that gives us a pathway to how they're actually going to achieve this goal. Maybe in this case, our character is a sharpshooter. And, when his sister's ex-boyfriend kidnaps her, he's not anywhere close to her. He can't save her in time. He can't get to her in time. He's like on one side of a field and he's on the other side with her. And so he happens to be a sharpshooter. And unfortunately, he has to take this guy out. So this is the talent that allows him to finally keep his sister safe. Now, what we want to be remembering when it comes to giving our characters a talent or a skill is there's going to be strengths and abilities tied to that skill, and we want to make sure that that lines up with our characterization. So, someone with this skill is going to have a steady hand, they're going to have good vision, things like that. So if we've already characterized our character as someone who has Coke bottle glasses and they can't see 5 feet ahead of them, well, that's not going to line up with this detail. So this is where we need to think about those characterization details and how they all work together. Now, one other thing I want to bring up when it comes to pulling your readers into the scene is to really think about where each scene takes place. There's so much that we can do with the setting, and choosing the right location can really reinforce the emotions of whatever's happening in the scene, whatever that action is. It can really ramp up emotions, and it can draw your readers in. So when you choose a specific setting that you know is perfect for the action that's going to unfold, you can also think about the sights and the sounds and the smells and the taste and the textures that are going to pull readers in and make them feel like they're part of that scene. Something else that you want to consider as you're writing those scenes to pull readers in is to be thinking about the weather. Weather is excellent for creating mood and atmosphere, for foreshadowing and things like that. So don't be afraid to use weather and draw on that superpower to really strengthen your scene. You can also infuse your scene with certain symbols, because universal symbolism is something that we all recognize and that readers will be hardwired to notice. And so you can use symbols in the scene to reinforce certain messages or just deepen the story's meaning. So just try to think about those things as you're writing your scene. Finally, we'll leave you with one more piece of advice when it comes to making strong story decisions, and that's to remind yourself of the scene's reason for being in the story. You know, what is it there to do? How is it furthering the plot and revealing something about your characters? What emotions are you trying to heighten? What hidden messages or realization or other subtext you want readers to pick up on? Knowing the answers to these questions are going to guide you to the best decisions for story events and what should take place. It's also going to help you figure out what setting to choose, what mood to set, and so much more. And of course, you're going to be able to deliver it all through engaging description, because you're going to know which details matter and need to be included. I hope this has given you some good ideas on how to use the show don't tell mindset to power your story, how psychology helps us build characters who think and act like real people, and how the human experience is a mirror that helps readers see how your characters are in some way just like them. Now, if you need more help, One Stop for Writers is packed with tools and resources so you get your best writing on the page. And the thesaurus database is great for leveling up your show don't tell. We're also always expanding it with new topics and entries. And remember, if you get stuck at any point or you'd prefer some step-by-step help as you write, we built a storyteller's roadmap at One Stop that guides you through the process of planning, writing, and revising, which is kind of like having a story expert at your shoulder start to finish. So if you need more support, check that out too. And happy writing.